Well, I wanted to tell you a little story from my travels in Asia. I was in Hanoi, in northern Vietnam, and I went out on a 2-day boat trip into Halong Bay, which is kind of the thing you do when you're in Hanoi. And the hotel I was staying in Hanoi said, "Oh, we didn't realize you were coming back to us after the trip that they had arranged for me." So they said, "We don't have a room for you, but don't worry, we have a always in Vietnam, we have a friend who has a place." And so they sent me to the Do Hotel. Now I had to hike with my full pack on, which was about 50 pounds, big deal. Hike with my pack through Hanoi, the busy streets of Hanoi, and it was a holiday weekend. It was a celebration of the day that they kicked the Americans out, and also right after that was May Day, so it was like April 31st. May 1st. Is that right? Does April have 31 days? April 30th and May 1st. Thank you. And so it was a 4-day long weekend, and Hanoi was electric. And so I had to go searching with my Google Maps, and you can always, it's just amazing with Google Maps now, because no longer do you have white tourists who look lost. You have white tourists who are standing on corners looking at their phones. And I was following the directions. But there are lots of signs in Hanoi. Everywhere, signs for everything, and all the shops are crammed together. So finding the sign for the Do Hotel was a little tricky, but there it is. It says Do Hotel this way, and it was a very weird address because it was down an alleyway. I wanted to show you down a dark alleyway. It even was darker than the picture I noticed this week. The picture's like, that doesn't seem so dark. Let me tell you, it was a dark alley for my lily-livered heart. And you can see there's evidence of people living down this alley because they parked their scooters. I love how many scooters there are. All the way down. And there's light coming out a little bit from some of the doorways and windows. And I have no idea what else is going on in this alleyway. But if you see way down in the back, there's a bright light. You see that? That's the Do Hotel. But I had to get there and stay alive. I know you think 6'5" white guy, what's he got to be scared of in Vietnam? I could think of everything that I could be scared of in Vietnam. It's just right at that moment. So I was so happy to find the sign, and then I looked down the alley. And so, with great gumption, and as my dad said, I said this earlier this year, look like you belong. You can't do that in Hanoi when you're 6'5" white guy. But I tried my best to straighten up and walk with some gusto. In case anybody stepped in front of me, they'd know I meant business, and I was going to the Do Hotel. And way in the back, there's this one sliding glass door with a light. And you get in, and it's quite nice, everything's dope. But this was a moment of real courage for me near the end of my Southeast Asian journey to get down there. And let's see the next slide, Norma. There's my little bed. And why I wanted to show you this was the first hotel that I thought might have bed bugs. I don't know why. Maybe I read a review or something. But I was really worried about bed bugs. But they did everything right. They had a vinyl encasing on their mattress, and there was no, holes in the, every crack was plugged up, and I did a full scan. But the worst was out that window and down was another dark alley on the other side of the building, the back. Okay, and down that dark alley, there was homes, like the kitchens and the recreation areas of people's homes spilled out into the alleyway. And it was a holiday weekend, so there was a hootenanny going on just below my head, my little bald head. And down there, they were just having a grand old party, and kids were screaming and yelling, and adults were drinking lots, and you could hear clinking of bottles and smashing of bottles, and a whole bunch of stuff. So even though I'd gotten down the dark alley with great courage, I ended up just above, one floor up from, let's say 6 feet up from, a Vietnamese family party. And I gotta say, that made me nervous. and the bed bugs, and all, but they weren't there. But it felt like, you think about them and then you start to itch, right? So I was itchy, but it was probably the static from the vinyl covering, which was good, but then it didn't see. Anyway, so I itched, and I worried about what was going to go on down here. And did I see a drain pipe that led right up to my room from that family's house that they could climb, the little kids? Like, kids, right? Like it was a fitful night. And I thought to myself, man, I feel way too close to the real life of Vietnam right now. This is what's happening in our scripture today. This lesson is a turning point in Mark. Peter calls him, after all that he's seen, calls him Messiah, or in the Greek, Christ, Son of the living God. Peter declares this because of what he has just witnessed up in Capernaum and Caesarea and in the provinces. All the healing and all the loving, all the death-defying work he has witnessed. He finally is ready to claim Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And he makes this claim in Caesarea Philippi, which is named for emperors and for Herod Philippi, who is the ruler, the Jewish ruler of that area. So Herod Philippi came in after Herod the Great. He became ruler of that part of Palestine, and he named this city, this Roman city, Caesarea after the emperors, and Philippi after himself. He had a big head. So in Caesarea Philippi, which was a seat of government and a Roman outport on the lake, he says, "You are the Messiah." So in a seat of Roman power, Peter says, "You are the Messiah." And in Jewish theology, the Messiah was a warrior who was going to come to beat down their enemies. So that's quite a claim to make in Caesarea, where there's troops and a king. Then he says, "You are the Son of the living God." Two things: political Messiah and Son of the living God. Surrounded by the ancient Greek gods that the Romans stole. There would have been images of those gods on every street. And right there in front of those gods, he said, "You're the Son of the living God." Right there in Caesarea Philippi, where the Romans ruled, the Romans who believed their emperors were the sons of living gods, he says, "You are the Messiah who's going to overthrow these people with force, and you're the Son of the real living God, not these cheap gods." Gutsy for Peter to say this out loud. Jesus says, don't tell anybody that. Right? I don't think Jesus is scared. I think he's scared people hear Peter say that on the streets of Caesarea. Then, in a turn, unexpected for Peter, Jesus speaks of the real path of the Christ, not the path of the Messiah that Peter thought. He says he must suffer and must die at the hands of his enemies. This all happens in Caesarea, and then they move. A few days later, 6 days, says, up on a hill. They move up to a hill, and he just takes Peter, James, and John up on a hill. And the hill is key because it speaks of the turning point. They go up to the hill in Mark, where they can look back at what's happened, and they look forward to the future. Jesus takes them up on a hill, where they turn from the life of the provinces toward life in the capital. They're on their way to Jerusalem, but the disciples don't know it yet. They're moving on that hill from the outskirts and the margins, from standing back to focusing, to getting to the real heart of the matter. They're walking straight into the center of the belief system of the Jews, to the power and the center of all that they know as a nation. And Jesus has said to them, it's a dark and troubling path. And they are up on that hill where they can see back and they can see forward. The transfiguration. Thank you, Ananias. Like Superman pulling off his shirt and being transformed, transfigured. What happens to Jesus is that he is revealed to them for the first time as holy, He's transfigured in front of them. He's bright as the brightest snow. And then God claims him again for the second time in the Gospel of Mark. Once at his baptism, and now on this hill. From now on, our understanding in our very being as disciples, we will be asked to become transfigured. Our very understanding and our very being from this moment on will be asked to be transfigured. The season of Lent, which starts on Wednesday, has this power. It can be a journey of transfiguration. Jesus is revealed to them as holy, and this week I got to thinking, we don't wrestle with holiness very much in the United Church. We don't talk about it much. What does it mean to be holy? What is the nature of being holy? Is it, like they had witnessed in the provinces, power, supernatural acts, physical healing? Is that what holiness is? Well, Jesus would suggest in the moments before the days before the transfiguration, that holiness is attached to servanthood in some way. And that means that it's attached to God's love in some huge way. Is holiness bringing God's love into the world in a way that's death-defying? One reporter said to Mother Teresa decades ago, "Mother Teresa, what is it like being holy?" And she said, "What, do you think I'm holy? You're holy. We're all holy." What does that mean? Is holiness bringing God's love to the world in a death-defying way? Well, we will learn in the days to come that holiness is losing self for the sake of others. As Jesus has said, he will give himself up. Giving oneself gives life to others, Jesus will teach us. Losing oneself is something greater, attaches us to something greater than oneself. The story seems contradictory. He says he must suffer and die, and Peter stumbles and says he will never let this happen. And he is rebuked in that powerful phrase like nowhere else in Scripture. "Get behind me, Satan." Wow, they were just friends a second ago. Peter had just said the most loving, devoted thing he could ever say. You are the Christ, the Messiah. It's holy words coming from Peter's mouth. And next thing you know, Jesus is saying, "You're not holy, Peter. You're not even with me. You're with those people. You're with the Satan folks. You're with the powers of evil. Get behind me. I don't like what you have to say." It's an unpleasant moment. And then days later, Jesus shines before them in everything Peter ever dreamed of. He gives Peter kind of what he wants. The holy, glowing Messiah. Peter must just like, this is what I was talking about. I don't know what he was talking about the other day. This is the Christ right there. It's a contradiction. He's revealed in a glorious way, which is probably easier for Peter to swallow. But then just before that and after, he journeys the path of suffering and servanthood. It's contradictory, but the two images, and I love that we read them together, the two images are inextricably linked. They cannot be separate. We don't get to choose one over the other. The glorious path of Jesus as the Holy One or the path of the suffering servant. We don't get to choose. But because we're at a turning point, we can see the past, we can glimpse the future that Jesus speaks about, and in the present moment of the transfiguration, we can sense the brilliant light and God's claiming of us. And that can be gas in our spiritual tanks. That light, that brilliance can be hope for the harder path. Do you see how they're linked? Suffering and servanthood will be tough, but God gives us this glimpse of the beauty and the glory to come. Lent is a time when we wrestle with human resistance to the grace of God, which is very real. It's a constant in our lives. It's resistance to the love of God, the grace of God, that some of us could call sin. God keeps pouring out love and light. We keep like, I don't know. That's just it's too much, God. It's too much for us. Peter's tension in this passage sets us up for this wrestling with our dis-ease, with the nature of true holiness, with the nature of servanthood. Like Peter, we want to deny the tough path of holiness. And when we are offered strength for the journey, for the brilliance of God's light, when God's grace is revealed, we so often resist. Like Peter, we get busy. We want to make booths. We don't know what to do with all that love. This, at its core, is a wrestling with the love God has for each of us. Well, I can't wrap this up in a tidy package filled with handy answers or a clear way forward. This lesson from Mark, this hilltop turning, resists all kinds of tidiness. But more often than not, it's the deep questions on a journey that move us forward. So I invite you to think about these things. Are you ready, Mayfair United Church, to be transfigured with Jesus? Do you want a piece of the action that is to come? That's what was asked of Peter. That's what's asked of us. Do you want holiness to become part of your character? Do you want holiness to become part of the fabric of your very life? Do you want to follow Jesus in the path of servanthood? Well, I invite you to strap on your seatbelts, as they say. Maybe dust off your halos, because Lent is coming. And we need to sing and pray and ask and listen and allow our hearts to crack all over, so God's brilliant light and wondrous grace can strengthen us for what is to come. May it be so. Amen.